All right, welcome to episode 44 of the Operators Pod. We got a bunch of stuff for you today. We are going to talk earnings again. We're going to talk about Shopify's Q4. January retail sales just came out. That's a topic for today. And I think more interestingly, stick around for the whole episode because we are going to hit on Yeti's earnings and get Jason and Mike's takes on sort of drinkware and Yeti entering into cookware. We're talking bags and contribution margin, gross margin. So it's actually a pretty good episode. I'm stoked for you guys to listen to this one. Episode 44. Always thank you to Fulfill, Sendlane, and Northbeam. So enjoy episode 44.
Okay, we're going to talk about three things this episode. First, we'll talk about January sales results. Then we'll talk about Q4 GMV. Then I want to talk about Yeti's earnings report. That's what I'm interested in. I think it affects everybody here. The last one really affects Jason, and I'd love to get his take on it. So first one, what we're talking about is there's a CNBC report that January retail sales volume was down year over year by like 1/8% or something. So
0.8. Yep.
Yeah. So there's a link right here. We'll show it here. You can click into it. What I think is interesting about this is people talk that January was actually really soft. Like that was just like the rumors on the internet.
Yep.
Now, in a couple minutes, talk about Shopify Q4 GMV. That's a separate conversation that doesn't affect this right here. But what I think is interesting about January being down is stock market's ripping. Earnings for last year for tech companies look fantastic. Earnings for retail companies do not look good. And I think we've entered a soft landing, but there's a lot of discourse on the internet about a soft landing for who. Middle income earners are feeling the most pressure they've ever felt, but bottom 25% of income earners are crushing it because minimum wage has come up, right? Like even if minimum wage hasn't legally came up, the de facto minimum wage you have to pay somebody's coming up. So they're out earning inflation. I think it's really interesting. Like if you're in the top 10% earners, you're doing fine regardless. And the New York Times even put this thing out about getting into Harvard that they call it like the messy middle. Like if you make over $100,000 a year, but below $1 million a year, like you have the worst chances to get into Harvard than anybody else. If you make below 100,000, you're crushing it. And like you'll get in off of just like income-based assistance or whatever. And if you're really rich, you can just pay for your way in. It's like this middle America is really feeling stress. And that is what was reported for January. And I think that ties into January retail sales being down. So a lot of background on economic relations there, but the headline story is retail sales were down year over year, adjusted for inflation. What do you guys think about that?
Well, Sean, let me ask you a question. Down 0.8%, right?
Correct.
How statistically, it's obviously statistically significant because otherwise they wouldn't publish it. But like, how much does 0.8 down versus 0.8 up really matter?
I think a lot, guys. Like, I think that at this scale, these small movements, it's like when they say like 3%, 3.5% GDP is like an economy on fire. But if you like asked any founder if 3.5% growth gets them out of bed, it's like, no. So I think like it when you look at the data, like some of the nuance of it, it's obviously everything is category and there's like lots and it's like category and geography and all that stuff. But like, even if you stripped automobile out of the numbers, you're still looking at retail spending was down 0.6%, which is like way lower. It's lower than they expected, but I think by like 100 or 200%.
Yeah. So it's a great question. When these numbers are so small, it's like compared to what? I just think it is a further fracturing of mainstream news articles versus people's perceptions, right? The other thing was that the job market was on fire. And I think somebody in this chat posted, it's like all the jobs they added were part-time jobs. So it's like, okay, full-time employment actually was down. So it looks like it's a softening of the soft landing, right? You never want any sort of retail sales decline because like a lot of things are, I mean, if the economy's 30 trillion or whatever, or GDP, it's like 80% of that is consumer. So any decrease is a huge amount of money. So yeah, and sales were up year over year in December. So it is like, it's kind of turning a corner right there. And you definitely, if this happens for 2 or 3 months in a row, you see immediate rate cuts. Like that is very, very bad.
Yeah. I think like, look, I think on one of our earlier episodes, we talked about this, right? That Q1 might actually be soft because Q4 was stronger than expected and people just spent a lot of money. And that if you look at it, savings rates are hitting, like we're just declining the amount of money that people have in savings. And it's like the real test is going to be, I think around April is what they're expecting when the spending, like when savings drops to possibly zero. What was interesting to me is also that like home and garden and building materials were down like 4% or 4.5% year over year. Like that's another big one.
Yeah. So it is all retail sales. So to Jason's point, he's like, look, it's fucking an eighth of a percent. Who cares? Right. Because Jason's, e-com's growing fast. You as a brand is growing fast. Like maybe your category is pretty stagnant, but things that require, like, a lot of the economy is debt driven. So car purchases or, home improvement or home builds, those are really impacted right now. And I was talking to somebody who knew a bunch of home builders and he's like, yeah, they're going bankrupt or they're shutting down. He's like, nobody's building homes right now because it doesn't make any sense. You can't, a hard money loan of 18% or whatever can't get you to build a property right now that makes sense. So there's still more pain in the economy. I think there will be pain in the economy in Q1, like Matt said, but the stock market isn't feeling it. So it is a disconnect. And, today it was just announced Japan's in a recession. There's an argument that Japan's been in a recession for 50 years or whatever, right? But like Japan is in a recession again. Stock market's still at an all-time high there, right? So it is a disconnect from Wall Street and Main Street.
I mean, so Jason, just like, I think the loose math on this is I think US GDP is somewhere around like 23, 24 trillion. And that about 70%, 68 to 70% of that is consumer spending. So like $15-ish trillion every year is consumer spending driven. So like if it shrinks by 1%, that's hundreds of billions in spending that just like goes away year over year. I think Sean, actually, it's a really cool point that like the soft landing thing, because we've all heard it. This could very well be like what a soft landing looks like. I don't actually know what the hell a soft landing is. I know it's a good headline.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely beats a hard landing. You definitely don't want that.
That just sounds bad.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, look, I think it's category specific. I know like a bunch of people in the home and garden space just because of what we sell. And dude, like January was fucking cold, like colder than they thought. And Jason, you started off talking about your damn roof eroding because of all the rain in California. Like there's just, these things matter, right? With spending patterns, I got friends who work in like the outdoor gear industry. And even prior to the like current recession that outdoor sports or outdoor recreation is in, if you had a bad winter, they had bad sales. Like they just didn't sell, like Canada Goose would sell a lot less winter coats if the weather was warm in winter. Yeah. So I think some of this, you just have to look at it category specific. The automobile thing is expected. It's everything else that kind of caught me a little by surprise, because like a lot of that isn't debt driven, like little things, right? Like Visa or MasterCard, but like not financing debt. You're not going out to get a loan to buy a Ridge wallet.
Well, dude, you could with Klarna, buy now, pay later, 4 quick payments to get your Ridge wallet. No, look, yeah, what I think this is a lot of the world right now is in a recession and still struggling with money supply shrinking, right? So like all these are buzzwords we heard a lot over the pandemic, and a lot of people are pretending to be smarter than they are. I'll be the first to say that I'm super dumb. So if you're listening to this podcast, thank you for being here. But the reduction in money supply and quantitative tightening, which is just like the overall shrinking and removing of money in the economy should create a deflationary effect, right? And we just had a bunch of inflation. So retail sales shrinking is probably what the Fed wants, like a little bit of bleeding. Like it's not like things fell 10%. I just think we're looking at a couple months of softness, and that's what a lot of the public companies are reporting to, which we'll get into in a little bit. But
Yep.
Mike, let's hear from you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not much to add other than that I think we are spending down stimulus and money that got banked in previous years. And we were always going to have to pay the piper for that in a number of ways. And that's one of the ways that it's happening right now, is that people are running out of capacity to spend. And that's going to show up if the worst that hits us is a couple of months, a couple quarters even, of very slightly negative growth on consumer spending. I think we could all live with that. If you compare this to a year ago, what we were expecting or even maybe hoping for, I think there was something like 90-something% of economists were convinced we were going to have a recession and a fairly hard landing, that the soft landing thing was off the table. So I do think one thing that we've learned is that although modern monetary policy has its issues, and I would not claim that they've done it perfectly, their ability to avoid very bad outcomes has been really remarkable. I mean, just to take a step back and say, listen, it's February of 2024. We are now almost 4 years from when initial COVID hit the United States. And you know what? The economy never cliffed. I mean, maybe it did for like a couple week period or whatever when there were lockdowns, but it's actually pretty remarkable. Like fiscally, I tend to be more conservative. I thought some of the stimulus stuff was insane. Well, some of it was insane. Some of it, there was plenty of fraud, but you can't argue with the fact that it's special and remarkable that the world economy took that kind of a shock. The U.S. economy took that kind of a shock and didn't just go in the crapper. That we really have been able, through thoughtful monetary policy and I guess the American consumer's willingness to buy in every season, no matter what's going on. The fact that, quote unquote bad news at this point is that retail spending might be down, consumer spending might be down 1%, is pretty remarkable.
So last thought on this. We started seeing this back in September in some of the data about credit card sales declining. I think we talked about it a little bit, and then we got the shopping spree in for the holidays, and it totally makes sense that we're kind of reverting back to where we were in September. And the people I talk to in the industry, there are not a lot of people spiking the football right now. It's definitely, I talk to agency owners and people that work at agencies, and I think it's tougher out there for a lot of people. I think there's certain brands that, they just reach a certain level, like we have, that we're doing well. I'm sure Ridge and Simple Modern are doing well. I know Pila Case is doing well, because we've reached through. But I think at the lower to middle end, like the 50 million and under revenue companies are not, it's more difficult for them. And if I look at our January data, we put up, by almost anyone's measure, a really strong January. I personally was a little bit disappointed with January. February's been ripping because we have a good sale that we always do in February with President's Day. It's always just like it's a good sale for us. It always does well for us. But I think the data of sales down is good, because I want rates to come down, because then debt is cheaper. That's what I want. I want debt cheaper. Selfishly.
Right. I was going to say, Jason, does debt being cheaper affect your business at all?
Debt being cheaper makes my life better. Right? Because we borrow money to buy inventory. We run our business. We're a bootstrapped business. We haven't sold any equity, so we have a modest, very modest amount of leverage that we like to use. Because when you're growing as fast as we are, you're unable to take out cash because you're investing it all in future stock. So We do a little bit of borrowing, and just in general, M&A deals will be better if rates come down. There's a lot of private equity money on the sidelines right now, and I actually don't understand how. I don't know how they get out of this, because I keep hearing that they have so much money to burn, and that if they don't burn it to spend, if they don't spend it, they're going to have to give it back to LPs. But I don't see a lot of spending, and I also haven't heard about a lot of money going back to LPs. I don't know how these guys do it.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, Jason. So 2 points there. The first point is people spiking the football. You can measure how good an industry is doing by online chatter on Twitter. I honestly believe that. And not a lot of brands posting, not a lot of people flexing right now. A lot of people talking about, launching affiliate agencies. It's like, yeah, that's like a case in point. It's probably there's less money going around in the ecosystem right now. I agree with that completely. We'll talk about Shopify's numbers. I think they kind of point to that same thing. Yeah, in general, I think people kind of feel, if you're a $1 million brand, it's very easy to 2x every single year, right? You could 5x, you could 10x. It doesn't really matter. But once you start getting to 50, that growth is kind of hard to find. And Ridge is growing really fast right now, but only because we launched new products. It's like me and Connor were talking that it's like bolting on a brand new business. It's like doing an M&A deal without having to spend any money on it. It's like, dude, I'm doing 6 figures a day in rings right now. And it's like, yep, couldn't do that last year. It's just new money I found. It's pretty cool. Now, your second point about debt and M&A, right? Why does that matter? So the way private equity works, and I recommend everyone listen to the iConnections Alt Investment Conference. The link's going to be right here. It's on YouTube. It's the smartest people on earth. It gets like 2,000 views an episode. So they have this big conference talking about alternative investments. Private equity, if you're a wealth fund or a hedge fund or anybody, or some rich guy, you need to diversify your portfolio. Like what you're actually looking for is some things to get 10% returns, some things to get 2% returns, but you just want diversified. Private equity is one of those use cases, right? They raise a bunch of money. They have to go out there and do deals. And if they don't do deals, they don't get you a return. Your money just gets, inflated away, and they can't raise their next fund. So they have to do deals. They did no deals last year. I was talking to an M&A attorney yesterday, and he's like, this is the year that they're going to do deals. Everyone wants interest rates to come down so that they can apply this money so that they can have a career and raise their next fund. So Jason's totally right. Money on the sidelines, getting very impatient. It needs to do a deal, but deals do not make sense at 6%. So long-winded. I agree with what Jason said.
Yeah, I want to make one other point here. I think, how do we apply this to the people listening to the pod? I think there are seasons when just the tide is in your favor, and there's growth that will come just from the tide being in your favor with the economy. A great example of this obviously was e-com in, say, mid 20 to mid 21. There was just, if you were in e-com, you were positioned in the right place. There was a lot of money flowing through stimulus, and that's an example of where these macro numbers just really deliberately impacted your business and how you made decisions. You had to be aware that just by being in the game, because the macro trends were so in your favor, that you were going to do great. And then there's growth that's provided by what you specifically are doing. So there's systemic growth. Hey, what's going on in the system? And then individual specific firm generated growth. And I think the larger picture numbers, more than anything else, will tell you when the tide's really against you or really for you. And then most of the rest of the time, they don't matter. It's firm specific. So you don't spend too much time thinking about it if you're running a business, unless there is a real macro trend. And then you do need to be aware of that with how you're buying inventory, how you're spending ad dollars, how you're thinking about investing in people. These are the ways that you can apply it. Doesn't feel like we're in a period right now where there's any trend that's large enough that it should be dramatically impacting how anybody who listens to this runs their business. Hey, you run Apple and you're selling whatever, trillions of dollars of AirPods. And like you said, Matt, 1% matters, and maybe you run your business differently. But for most of us, I don't think it matters. It's interesting to watch and track. And the reason to track it would be when you do hit some kind of a macro mega trend that is going to impact your business, you're aware.
Look, I got to talk about Fulfill for a second. So, one of the things when you have sponsors on a pod is there's always this question of like, how genuine is the recommendation, right? I've actually personally sent them to people that are looking for a solution. So I sent them over to Fulfill. I made the introduction. And I was, I've been pleasantly not surprised because I know the reputation, but it was like, it's been nice to hear from those guys that I sent to Fulfill that they're actually having a really good experience. So it's kind of cool as a podcast host to have a sponsor be living up to the endorsement. So shout out to Fulfill today. Sean, you want to take this? I think this is a good point to talk about Shopify's GMV, because I think that was we were messaging back and forth in chat on this for the past week, right? They dropped earnings, positive. Markets didn't like outlook, I guess, was one of the things. But what's everybody's take on their GMV numbers from Q4?
All right, well, I'll talk more, but sorry, audience, if I'm talking too much this episode. People really hate when there's too much Sean on the episode. Shopify had GMV, gross merchandise value. So all of the money that flowed through a Shopify website was $75 billion, okay, in Q4. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but I think their yearly GMV is like 230 or 250 billion.
230, somewhere in there.
Yeah. That's a really impressive number. I think Amazon doesn't publicly release their number, but it's estimated to be like 600 billion, right? Maybe it's a little bit more, 650, 7, something like that.
Yeah, it's in there.
So they're a third of what Amazon does across all their stores. Their GMV in Q4 was up 22% year over year. That's the really important thing we're going to talk about. If GMV is up 22%, they do not release same store sales year over year. So they have an active sales team, and we know for a fact they closed On Running, and On Running probably has a 500 million Q4. Like, that brand crushes it. They're public. Their numbers are going to come out in a couple weeks, so we'll know what percentage. And we could probably go through and we could add up everyone they've added publicly in Q4 and then get their GMV, because a lot of them are public companies, and then compare that year over year. But my best guess is that Shopify as a platform, same store sales were up like 15% year over year. So everyone listening to this is on Shopify, basically. And that's what you should be comparing yourself to. Year over year sales growth of 15% in Q4. If you beat that, you're in the upper half of Shopify stores. If you didn't beat that or you're declining, that's the real benchmark. And that's why I think it's so important that like we have those public conversations, because no one wants to say what their sales are. Nobody wants to say what their growth is. Everyone wants to say that they're crushing it. The ecosystem as a whole probably grew 15% in Q4. That's the reality. That's what we should talk about.
I'm curious what you guys think of this, because I don't think we have the data on this from Shopify. But what do you think Shopify behaves more like Facebook in that the bulk of their revenue comes from this massive amount of accounts? Like, I think Facebook's got 7 million ad accounts. So like, do you guys remember when like a whole bunch of big companies were like, we're going to stop spending money on Facebook during the Black Lives Matter thing? There was a moment, right, where like the Fortune 100 pulled spend and Facebook was like, okay. It's just like, the concentration wasn't there. They didn't care. Do you think Shopify's numbers, their GMV, is from this huge long tail of stores, or do you think it's their Shopify Plus merchants that drive the bulk of their GMV? Anybody have a take on that?
I can say that Ridge is roughly 0.1% of Shopify's GMV. You can do the math. They have 75 billion in GMV in Q4. So if your store did $75 million on Q4, you are 0.1%. I'm not going to get into the specifics. The specifics, it could be higher, it could be lower, but I think they're actually pretty top heavy when it comes to GMV. If you think about that, it's like, look, I'm not that big of a store, right? Like some of you guys run bigger stores than me, right? So in a group chat that we're in, we probably have 1% of Shopify's GMV on it. So if you think about that, it's like, fuck, we don't know that many people.
Well, listen, I actually think we can know the answer to that. If there's one thing that technology has proven, it's that it gravitates towards power laws, always. It is 80-20 or 90-10 rules in every data set I have ever seen. I'm really more of an analyst than anything else. And whether you're talking about, back when I ran an auction website with my brother, if you looked at our distribution of revenue, it was a 90-10 or even 95-5 rule, where 5% of the customers drove 95% of the revenue. And that same phenomenon is true whether you're talking about spend on an e-commerce website or Wikipedia article edits. Like if you look at the editing community on Wikipedia, boom, same thing. It's a huge power law. And we see that even when we look at stock market performance return, even among all tech firms, it's a huge power law. The big winners are massive winners and make up an enormous amount of the valuation. So undoubtedly, that's what's true of Shopify. Huge power law. And like you said, Sean, we personally know like, oh, okay, this group of like 7 people accounts for 1%. And how many stores does Shopify say they have?
2 million.
Yeah. How many? Sorry.
So
2 million unique stores.
So that's all you really need to know, is that we probably, if we kind of contacted everybody we knew, we could probably find 150 people and get to 10% of that. And you're like, okay, well, you got about 2 million other stores on the other 90%. Like, boom, massive power law.
Yeah, the math checks, right? If they did 230 billion in GMV in 2023 and there's 2 million stores, that's $115,000 per store per year in sales.
Now, yeah. So this is about GMV. To go against Mike's point, they actually probably make the most of their money outside of payment processing from this long tail of stores, because every store's got to give them at least $50 or whatever, right? And Shopify caps how much they charge big stores at $40K a month. So, like, I don't know why they do that, but it's awesome. It's like it's a variable cost up until $40K a month, and then you're just capped to that. So that's fucking really cool that they do that. But
it's actually interesting, Sean. What you're bringing up is a really interesting point. So if you think about what Shopify does is they say, hey, you can get an e-commerce business off the ground. You don't have to worry about developers. You don't have to worry about managing AWS. You don't have to worry about order management. We're going to take care of all that stuff. We're going to abstract all that complexity. If you're starting an e-commerce business, or if you're doing $100,000 a year, $1 million a year, $5 million a year in sales, it's like, man, what a value proposition. That would be great for me. Like if I were to pay to have all those things done, it would be prohibitively expensive, certainly prohibitively expensive to do it really well. If you go to that top, whatever, 10% that might be driving 20% of that GMV, they're situated differently. If Shopify jacks rates on that group, they do actually have the resources to build it themselves and to create their own platforms. And maybe that's why you're seeing the dynamic that you're seeing. The people that bring a lot of the GMV to the table can have the resources and the ability to recreate a facsimile of Shopify. But the vast majority of those 2 million stores don't. And so the margin should be higher there, right? Like that should be where you make your money, because those are the people that literally couldn't be in business without you.
I guess I'm just challenging this. Like, do we actually think that same store year over year sales went up 15% in Q4?
Yeah, it's a good question. It just depends on how good you think their sales team is. And we could back into that based on they have sales and marketing expenses, right? What I'll say is if they signed on running in Q4, and that's what they said on their earnings call, on running is very close to 1% of GMV addition. That's what you have to just remember, is that like 1% of $75 billion is $750 million, and on running will have a $500 million quarter. So it just depends on how good their sales team is at bringing in these enterprise clients. And that is the big talking point, is how do they get more enterprise clients? They're trying to bring the entire LVMH book of business over. And like, that is how Shopify is going to grow. To your question, yeah, I'm guessing 15%. It can't be more than 22% because we know they
I
added
think
some
it's probably
people.
closer to zero. I think it's closer to zero than it is to 15%. I'm just trying to do like if I like try to slice up the math like Mike is doing, there's like 30 some thousand Shopify Plus stores, right? So like if you just counted them and forget everybody else, my math says that that's like 6 million plus in GMV per one of those.
All right, guys, I just want to say, until Shopify decides to sponsor the pod, Sean needs to stop giving them reasons to make more money.
Yeah.
You know,
Jason's
Sean, cut it out.
If you're spending more than $1 million a year on paid ads, you probably have some amount of wasted spend. We all do. Marketing is the biggest line item on Ridge's P&L. So we spend more on marketing than we do on SaaS, people, or COGS. And 1% wasted spend can totally make or break a brand, right? And how do you determine if it's a channel messing up, or if it's an ad messing up, or if it's your team messing up? You need an independent source of truth there. So we recommend Northbeam multi-touch attribution. So what does that actually do? Facebook in platform wants you to spend more money on Facebook, right? They want to tell you that all of your sales are coming from Facebook. Google wants to say all of the sales are coming from Google, right? And you probably use Google Analytics, which is a last click attribution platform designed to make Google look better, right? So someone Googles your brand off of a Facebook ad, clicks a branded search term, who gets that sale? GA is going to say it's Google. Google Conversion Pixel is going to say it's Google. Facebook's going to say it's Facebook. How do you make sense out of that in this world? That's where Northbeam MTA comes in. A multi-touch attribution tool takes all of that data, all of their historical data, the billions in ad dollars that they've seen run through their pixel and their ad platform, and they determine the actual breakdown and who deserves the credit. So they got a team of data scientists from Stanford, Harvard, they got PhDs, and they've been working on this model for 6+ years. Pre-COVID, they were early movers in this space, and they know marketing attribution better than anybody else. Data is super flexible. They have more reports and metrics than any other platform out there, over 450 you can choose from. I look at 5 and I use it to determine if I'm wasting money on different ad platforms. Do you think it's time to get on TikTok? Well, the best way to know that is to be able to compare TikTok versus a Facebook versus anything else. That's what Northbeam can do. And don't just take my word for it. Everyone on the podcast uses it. I've been on Northbeam. I was the very first customer 6+ years ago. Jason uses it. Dr. Squatch uses it. BlendJet, Reef Sandals, all 9-figure brands who love and use Northbeam every single day. So what are you waiting for? Get a demo. Go to northbeam.io. Click the link in the description. Tell them the operator sent you, and we're here to help. So thank you so much, guys. Thank you for the support. If you're ready to check out and get to the next level of ad spend, check out Northbeam. Thank you.
A quick little Panzerism that I want to do today, because I haven't done one in a few weeks, and people have been asking. I know you guys don't like them, but apparently
I like it. I get smarter.
So, all right, now this one is a little bit different. This is about making work fun. I think this is a huge productivity hack. It's like, make people laugh. Don't be so serious, and make people laugh by not do it without ripping on people. Like, it just, God, every conversation is like, doesn't have to be so serious. HexCloud, I think, is a really fun working environment because Danny and Cole founded the company, and they're both complete jokesters, and they're not like doing pranks and making people feel bad. They're just starting off every meeting like trying to be funny and without ripping on people. Like, make it fun, have a sense of humor. Everyone is so serious. Like, I'm actually kind of like afraid these days sometimes to try to be funny. I like how Sean just like lives by the DGAF principle, don't give a fuck, with his tweets. But like the other day I tweeted, that I got a Galentine's Day text, and I thought it was a typo because I'd never heard of Galentine's Day, and it's a thing. And I was like totally ready for people to start calling me insensitive or something, but like, I mean, I just
Wait, you need to go back. You got invited to a Galentine's party of some sort?
It was a text from a brand. Come on.
Okay.
It was a text from a brand. I won't name the brand, but I mean, I think it's silly, but hey, do what you got to do to sell. But I mean, it's, God, why is everybody so serious? Like, I want to, like, have some fun, people. At work, our work environment is great. People love working at HexCloud because, I mean, literally it starts from the top. And do any of you guys do that? Like, how serious is your organization?
I've got a story. I don't think you guys have heard this story before. So I got a story for you. So our company does a lot of stuff with philanthropic giving, and it's gotten to a big enough amount that we've had to, really figure out some structure. And my wife, this is really motivating to her. And so she volunteered. She's like, I will come in and help put in some structure. She's detail oriented. She's really gifted. I'm like, okay, great. So she starts getting involved. We put a structure in place, and we set up a meeting with the entire company where we're going to lay out, hey, here's the structure of how we're going to do all this. And one night, she and I were watching The Office, and specifically, we were watching the episode Dinner Party. Now, did any of you guys know what I'm referencing here? The Office, okay, Sean, I'm disappointed in you. I want you to go and I want you to watch it if you have not watched The Office. But anyway, and we got this idea of, hey, wouldn't it be really funny if Heather and I got in a massive fake fight in front of the company? Like if we staged a massive fight with each other. And so we're going back and forth about this. We're kind of playing with the idea, and we're like, let's do it. This presentation's like a couple days before April Fool's. Let's do it. So we do all this planning. We script it out, and I'll give you guys basically the highlights of what happened. So the way the meeting starts, she and I are up in front of the entire company. And like, just to frame this, there are some people in the audience. This is their first company meeting. They've just joined the company. And so I start talking, and after I've been talking for a couple minutes, Heather interrupts me and she's like, that's not right. And I'm like, mildly annoyed. I'm like, oh, okay, sorry. So I talk some more, and then she stops me and corrects me again. And at that point, I'm like, okay, guys, Heather and I are not on the same page. Let's do this. Let's break. You guys discuss this question. She and I are going to get on the same page, then we'll come back. So everybody's talking. Then I bring everybody back up, and I start talking some more. And then Heather kind of like laughs and is like, you were just butchering this. And that was the scripted trigger. And I'm like, I say something like, well, hey, it'd be a heck of a lot easier if you were supporting me instead of nitpicking in front of the entire company. And she fires something back, and I fire something back. And it basically gets to the point where there's this point where Heather, this goes on for maybe like 30 seconds. There's this 30 seconds. Imagine how awkward it is in front of the entire company that we're fighting with each other. And eventually, Heather's line is something along the lines of, you know what? I don't think this is what I signed up for. I don't want to do this. And she kind of looks down at the floor, and she's like, you know what? I think I quit. And my line was, you can't quit if you're fired. And so she walks out of the room. And like, I just stare at the floor for like 30 seconds. We're like, the whole plan was we were going to create this awkward moment, and we're going to just let it last. And then she comes back in, and we're like, April Fools. So
you're
okay.
Awful. I'm uncomfortable.
So many things. We set up a camera, and we captured the entire company's faces on this. And I just cannot, and like basically the most of the rest of the day was the company just reacting to this event, this like semi-traumatic, but also hilarious event. And the faces of people are hilarious. Like there's a point where you can see that like every woman in the company is ready to just destroy me. And, it's funny. I've got all these people that I work with that have known me for like a decade, and I didn't tell any of them. And some of them I've known for multiple decades. I was asking one of them what he was thinking, and he was like, actually, I was thinking, he can't come back from this one. I need to think about where I'm going to work next. So anyway, we had this whole, like, the most elaborate April Fool's joke of all time. We videoed the whole thing. The only way we convinced some of the employees that it was actually a joke, and we weren't just trying to pretend like it was a joke, was we had taken a video. My kids had listened to us, rehearse this fight, and we took a video of it, and we showed them a video of my kids having this fake fight that we had just had in front of them. And anyway, one of the guys on our team, he posted his Apple Watch. His heart rate had gone up to 120, and just out of anxiety from watching this. And so I can say this. It was like, what it was like is, it's like if you've ever been in a situation where you look back on something and you were like, it was exhilarating, but now that I think about it, I could have died right then, and I'm really glad I didn't die. That's the way I felt about this, because it all worked out and it ended up being funny, but like there were probably a lot of ways it could have gone really poorly for me. But as a very long story way of saying, Jason, I'm all in on taking your work seriously and not taking yourself too seriously and having fun.
Mike, what year was this?
This was 2 years ago, 2 springs ago.
Okay. Not bad.
I have the video. I will post it in chat because it's worth a watch.
We every year, my favorite time of like my favorite thing that our team does every year is for our annual holiday party. This is led by a guy named Milo. So shout out to Milo on our team. He's like our animator, freaking video genius. They create a roast video. It's usually like 4 or 5 minutes long. And what they do is all year long, we record everything, right? Every Zoom call, but they actually record meetings and interactions. Like, he's a sneaky little fucker. He's like recording stuff all the time. And at the end of the year, they produce this 4 or 5 minute roast that they put up in front of the whole company and people's spouses. And they just destroy us, starting with like myself down. And it's so uncomfortable. Like this year, they actually 3D printed a little wrestling figurine of our COO. And then he animated this little fucking thing into all kinds of shit that was inappropriate. Like, the video is an HR violation through and through, right? Like, you could send this to a government agency and be like, shut this company down. But it's the best thing. Everybody loves it. Like, it's just embarrassing and it's amazing. So Jason, huge fan.
Well, and one of the things you said there, Matt, and I think this is where it starts, is as a leader, you set the pace by being willing to make fun of yourself. Like, if you don't take yourself too seriously, if you're willing to make fun of yourself, you're willing to like, be the center of the joke, then like it frees people up to have a totally different work environment. But you got to set the pace there as the leader.
I'm just very funny naturally, so I don't gotta do all this work. But yeah, man, it's a good Panzerism. Mike, your wife's a saint for being like, I'm gonna put up with this.
I mean, guys, in the days leading up to it, I just the line, "You can't quit if you're fired." I mean, I laughed so much in the buildup. I'm like, can I deliver this line without just busting out into laughter?
I'll be really honest with you. The cost savings is probably the biggest driver for me. I think I'm going to save like over $100,000 a year switching. And there is nothing I would not do to save $100,000 on SaaS. Like whatever the darkest thing you're thinking, yeah, that's me trying to save money on SaaS. So that's a big driver. And look, I believe in the product. I've seen it. I've seen the demos. People are like, isn't migration going to be a pain in the ass? Yes. That is why I did not migrate in Q4. It's never going to be painless to do one of these things, right? Like, I've been on Klaviyo for 10 years. It's gonna take some time and effort to put it in, but Jimmy is the type of guy who's committed to make it as seamless as possible. So I'm very, very excited to switch to Sendlane. They're a startup, man. I think their culture matches mine. I'm excited to be there. So Photoshop a Sendlane logo on my jersey because that's where I'm going, guys.
Love it. Well, Sean, More earnings from consumer, right?
Yeah,
We're
this
in
is going to be
earnings
like
season.
a very boring episode, but it affects Mike and it affects Jason, so I thought it's interesting. Yeti put out their earnings, stock down 15% off the news. Very, very, very low growth year. Growth was up maybe 4%. Q4 was bad to them. Drinkware was up 12%. The cooler business was down. And this is all adjusted for their returns thing. So like removing all of that, growth was actually only up like 3%. Net income was like down 3% year over year, like adjusted for the recalls. Wasn't a very good year. But the reason why it affects both of you guys is Jason, they bought a cookware company. So they bought Butter Pat or whatever, this I guess it's the cast iron stove cook thing. And Mike, drinkware sales were still up 12%. They have $1 billion drinkware brand. It was the first year they hit $1 billion in drinkware. We all knew that was going to happen. That was just kind of like what they were projecting. But first, Jason, what do you think about Hexclad X Yeti, the rivalry of the century? And then I want to go to Mike. Thoughts on one of the giants slowing down so much?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned the cookware thing because I saw an Instagram post, and it was Yeti and Hexclad. We have this barbecue pan which got holes on it, and you can do veggies on your grill with it. And
shit, I'm buying that.
And it looked really cool. And I see it like with the Yeti logo, and I was like, "What's going on here?" And I asked my team, like, "Oh, we did a partnership with Yeti in Australia. Like our agency set it up. It was really cool." And I'm like, "Hey, send me some pictures of that because I want to go and post that. Like that's fun. That's a victory lap, right?" And then as I'm getting the pictures, they're like, "Yeah, but Yeti said they can't do anything else with us because they're doing this cookware thing." They came out with a cast iron pan of their own last year at some point. I don't know how it's done. Maybe it's in particle. I don't know if it's in particle. Is Yeti in particle, Sean?
Only the Australian store.
Okay. And anyway, they got a lot in retail, but in any event, it was like a cast iron pan that's like 5x the price of a Lodge cast iron pan, and Lodge is even like a premium pan. So like, who's going to buy this? I mean, look, it makes sense for Yeti to try to do cookware. The thing about cast iron, and I can't wait for all the cast iron aficionados to come out.
I'm a fan of cast iron.
Yeah, it's a fucking antique, dude.
It is.
So retire your fucking antique. Give it back to grandma. It's so dumb. Using a cast iron pan is just dumb. I'm going to leave it at that. So, maybe there are some people who will buy. It's so heavy. Go camping, okay, and trek in all your crap, and take a cast iron pan versus a light Hexclad pan that cooks even better than a cast iron pan because you're allowed to actually wash it after.
Right.
There's
so
my
Jason,
rant on that. Thank you, Sean, for teeing that up.
So they bought the company that they did that collab with, and the unique thing about their acquisition strategy is, one, they bought that company for like under $10 million. It was a very, very small acquisition, and they're just rolling it into the Yeti brand. Like they said today on the earnings call, they do not want to run a multi-branded retailer. Their goal is to try to roll it into and have Yeti as like a cookware company. And they call out that like, look, cookware is a $10 billion a year market, and it's bigger than outdoor. It's bigger than bags. It's bigger than everything. So
I love it. Bring it. More awareness for the market. That's great. But it is so easy. I could start selling cast iron pans in a week, guys. Like it is so easy to go to get a cast iron pan is like the easiest thing to make. Why would they pay a penny for that? Like, especially if they don't care about the brand. Why don't they just go make them?
I don't get that. Actually, it's a great point. Like it is such an old product with such a mature supply chain. I wonder what the justification there was for somebody like them. Because the answer to your question, Jason, who the hell buys a more expensive cast iron pan? The Yeti customer, the same person who buys a $450 cooler that was like Matt, $30 before them.
Yeah, Matt, but the cooler customer is not showing up anymore. Q4 sales were down massively, double digits for the cooler customer. So is that
customer not spending, or is that just because they've like tapped out that market for that product?
So they specifically addressed that they do not think it is a tapped out market. Like they say people have said that for years to them. They continue to find new customers. They think it is just a macroeconomic headwind that affect higher price point items. But
I mean, like all outdoor is down. I could buy that. I am with Jay. I think, look, Jason, that you're calling out. I love that you went right to the product and the customer, just like a good operator thing. I would never take cast iron camping. It's a stupid fucking thing. Like, why would you do that? Seriously, I'm with you. Very cool, Mike. What's your read on the drinkware thing too with Yeti?
So we talked about this a couple episodes ago, that even when you think about your competitors, they often are playing a different game than you are. And so they might not be as much of a quote unquote competitor as you think, because they have different goals, different objectives. And I think this is a good example that Yeti is ostensibly a competitor of ours, but in a lot of ways, we're not really playing the same game at all. They are public. They want to push volume towards D2C. They are expanding out into a lot of non-drinkware things. I mean, they're really, more than being a drinkware company, they're an outdoor company, I think. And that's the definition of the brand. And like you said, Sean, like even the way that they're trying to do cookwares, they're trying to do cookware around cookware you use outside. It seems like Yeti's not trying to take over your kitchen. I don't think that's their strategy. I mean, when you're making acquisitions, when you're pushing into new categories, you're usually not doing that because you see lots and lots of growth potential in your core categories, as a general observation. I think my observation from Yeti, and I've written about this on Twitter, when we started Simple Modern, this would have been late 2015. We sold our first piece of drinkware in March of 2016, and Yeti was really scaling up during this period. And it was very clear to me that we could not compete with Yeti at the things that Yeti wanted to do. Yeti's dominance in their core demographic of men that want to be outdoor, call it 35 to 55, was, unquestioned. And there was no way we were going to have any success going up against them doing that. And really, our company strategy in part was informed by, we're going to build a competency and an excellence at doing something different than what Yeti's doing. Specifically, we created a competency around more of the fashion angle of our product and serving women and, really just families, a different customer. I think Yeti did a masterful job of defining its brand. One of the reasons why it's good to talk about them, even though, and I think they'd be interesting even if I wasn't in the category I'm in, is that they are one of the big success stories in consumer, and one of the great stories of creating a brand that really stands for something and you know what it stands for out of the last, call it 10, 20 years. But there's a downside. When you define your brand, you're defining, here's who we're for and what we're about, and here's who we're not for and what we're not about. And as our category has become more fashion driven, that is not Yeti's core competency, and it's not Yeti's core customer, in my opinion. And it's left room for a bunch of other brands. I mean, Stanley's an obvious example from the last year, but there's several others, and we're one of them, to take significant share in the market. I have a spreadsheet that I track where I look at Google search volume and Amazon search volume and how it's moving around. And, over the last year, for example, Yeti grew how many searches, but their share of search went down. Like their share of the market in drinkware is going down. They are less dominant in drinkware than they were a year ago. And in a lot of ways, I don't see that trend discontinuing. I'd say I see that trend continuing. Now, fortunately, drinkware is a really big market, and I think there's a lot of opportunity for them to continue to grow drinkware sales just because they're in a great market. But I think most likely we've already seen peak Yeti in terms of the percentage of the drinkware market that they represent. On coolers, I don't know the answer. I know that management, even if they thought coolers was saturated and had already seen its best days, they're not going to tell you that, because that is how you get fired. And so nobody's going to say that. That's how you go from a negative 15% to a negative 40% day in the stock market. So I think you just have to let their actions communicate what they think about the business, and they think they need to find another product category vertical where they can produce growth and it's big enough where the dollars can be meaningful. And I'll be really interested to see what they do in cookware, especially cookware that's designed for outdoors.
No, that's really smart, Mike. And you're totally right that their drinkware business grew by $100 million, but at the same time, Stanley went from 100 million to 750 million overnight, right? So their share of that market is shrinking, even if their sales are growing. We can talk about Mystery Ranch real quick. Mystery Ranch is a legacy, awesome outdoor brand, really, really well respected for what they do in the fire community, the police community, the military community. Yeti bought them for, it's probably 30, 35, $40 million. They're not releasing sales data on these brands, but they say it'll be 2% sales accretive. You can do the math that it's probably, Mystery Ranch does like $30 million a year. The only thing I'll say there is what Yeti did do really well is they hired this guy, Lane, who was the CEO of Osprey Bags, who sold to Helena Troy, and he was the CEO of Camelback. So they have big aspirations for their bag line. If they're bringing in literally one of the heaviest hitters in the industry, getting him out of his non-compete to come over, we'll see if they can turn their bags around. That has been a sore spot on Yeti for a long time. Thanks for indulging me.
Part of the acquisition, or this is an unrelated fact?
Unrelated fact. Okay. But they hired him in January. They announced the acquisition on February 1st. So you can do some math there that they then, and also the rumor is that they missed out on the Osprey purchase, that Helena Troy just outbid them, was more aggressive. Fall Raven was looking at them. Thule was looking at them. Yeti was looking at them. Helena Troy got the acquisition. So I think they've had a long relationship with Lane. He gets to come over here and rebuild Yeti bags for the first time, which is such a bad part of their business that they don't even break it out on their earnings. It's drinkware and then coolers and equipment, and they just roll it into equipment. So anyway, thanks for indulging me on the Yeti conversation.
Sean, can I ask you a question on the bag thing with Yeti? I've always been, because you've been saying this for a while, that they're not good at bags. Why? Like, is it a design thing? Is it they just don't know the market? Like, what is it? Like, what's your read on that? Because you'd think that they would be just fine.
Dude, here's the dirty secret. And if you, this is the deep end conversation people wanted to hang out in. Bags is the worst fucking business on earth. I talk about wallets being the worst business, but I mean, Mike has some experience in the bag space.
It sucks. Guys, it sucks.
So here's why bags suck so much. They are expensive as hell to make. So even the shittiest bag, zippers, like cost, like YKK has a monopoly on zippers. So if you want good zippers, it's a normal backpack could have $4 in zippers in it. Then they're heavy and they're designed to fill up space. So like it's hard to get a lot of them packed into a container. So they're expensive. Most of them are made in China, and the import on bags is like 50%. So
because it's duty and tariff here, guys. You get nailed on both those sides. And so like Sean's saying, they stack to like some absurd percentage.
Yeah. And so people, Away moved to Indonesia because of a tariff-free luggage manufacturing. So like people are moving to other parts of Southeast Asia, but like zippers are still made where they're made. It's a very complex supply chain. And now the other thing is it's a fully saturated market at wholesale. And when we sell in rings, it's a new category for people. We sell in wallets, it's a new category mostly, and they're small, they're high price point. You sell in bags. We've had conversations with Nordstrom's and they're like, okay, who should we take down? Because if we're putting you up, somebody has to come down. We only have 6 spots for bags. And if you go into an REI, it is packed full of fucking bags, right? It is the worst. It's the worst category to be in. I honestly think that.
Then why are they all in it?
Because they're stupid and they got tricked.
Okay, then Sean, why are you in it?
Yeah, I mean, dude, it's a great question, right?
Like Mike, your homepage right now is a tote bag.
Well, listen, we've made it work from a sales perspective, but from a margin perspective, I mean, really for us with totes, we came out at, so the pricing we came out with, I think we're $10 higher than what we came out with, because I mean, really what it comes down to is, can you command any kind of reasonable margins? And if the answer is yes, then, bags is fine, right? Like Louis Vuitton, right? You can make bags work. But the problem that we have seen is that the main place we've really had success is kids backpacks. We have like the number one selling kids backpack on Amazon. And the reason for that is there's more surface area to differentiate yourself. You know what 95% of adult men will buy when they buy a backpack? They will buy a very basic black backpack. There's no preference for special colors. They don't want special features. They just want a black backpack. And so the surface area for differentiation is smaller. And as a result, there's more commoditization. I mean, you got a ton of these guys that are just, eking it out at the margins, selling into Walmart or Target or whatever. As an example here, Target approached us last summer and said, hey, can you support on our website on .com? Because literally none of our backpack vendors can support anything digital. They just have none of the capabilities, because these guys are basically just running these super lean cost structures and just, like we said, importing from whatever, Indonesia or Vietnam, and just trying to eke out 50 cents or $1 a bag or whatever. So it's a very, very tough business, and you've got to really have a way to get significant demand organically, or you got to have a way to hit decent margins to make it worth all the headaches.
Yeah. It's really hard to do a mass market bag that works in wholesale that has good margins. And Yeti's trying to do that. And that's why their bags are $250 and they just don't sell very many.
There's one other problem that I'll add. I didn't say this, but you saying that made me think of it, Sean. And it actually connects to something else worth bringing up, which is somebody you mentioned, Away, and Away is going to go into mass retail. I'm going to make a bold kind of observation. Over the last 10 years, we've proven something. Omnichannel is best. You should be omnichannel. Unless you're like a very, very, very rare edge case, you should probably be omnichannel. And that I would expect that almost all of the best brands are going to be omnichannel. And the remnants of the true D2C darlings, like Away, they're even deciding we need to be omnichannel. So one of the reasons why bags suck has to do with this. If you look at the strategy of the physical retailers like Target or Walmart, a lot of times this is where they're either trying to buy from generic suppliers or they're trying to be the supplier and white label it. So for example, for us in backpacks, one of the reasons why the category is not as advantageous, we're number one on Amazon. And usually that would be a formula of, okay, we're number one on Amazon. Now let's go dominate in Target and in Walmart and in physical retail, and let's grow a big business and let's get economies of scale and let's get synergies and all that stuff. Can't do it because they're not interested. They don't care. They're running the Target playbook, the Walmart playbook when it comes to backpacks. It doesn't include that. It doesn't include us basically. And you'll see this in apparel often as well, that like you can't sell apparel into Target right now. You can't get those omni-channel benefits in some categories because of the retailer strategy.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. Now I'll just defend why we're in it, and then I'd love to hear from the rest of the group. We can be in it because we don't need it to be margin efficient at all. I have two 90% margin businesses. If I have a 50% one, who fucking cares? I'm not going to market. I'm not public. I can do whatever I want. The other thing is, it is just the add-on item of the carry-on. The carry-on is the flagship item of our travel line, and the carry-on will do 8 figures this year. The bag's just what people add to their cart because they need a backpack. So we're also at a brand we can charge $185 and make it work. But yeah, it's a shitty fucking category, dude. You shouldn't be in bags. And that's why, everyone was interested in Osprey because they have the wholesale relationships. They sell in wholesale and it works. But Jason or Matt, any final thoughts on that?
This has been super helpful for me because Mike, you know this, but we're exploring bag, but not like, backpacks and shit like that. I'm just looking at But again, Sean, I think for us, Sean, I'm approaching it like you are, right? We have a high volume of customers. We can take a different slant at it than most brands can, right? We can go in like sustainable materials first. So we've been looking at the category closely, and can we do something unique and interesting and different, right? Like a good product that's like really different from what else is out there.
And one of the most important things for public companies is this gross margin number, because it's apples to apples across every industry, and that's what Wall Street understands. You cannot launch a category that has lower than average gross margins. Like, you need to see gross margin expansion, and bags are going to be lower margin than a $350 cooler. It's just the reality of the fucking business. And that's why it's been so hard for them to get into new product categories.
And that was the point that I was making earlier when we talk about the games people are playing. Yeti, basically their management has a mandate. You need to grow sales and you need to grow profits while doing it at things that are at the same or greater margins. And when you are at the scale that they are at, it's an exceedingly small list of ways that you can do that. And that's how you end up launching whatever it is, a $350 cast iron, $400 cast iron pan, because you're trying to be margin accretive and launch into a category that's big enough that it can move the needle.
Such a great point, Sean and Mike. You know, especially like for people listening to this show, as you get to a size or even any size and you're considering any kind of acquisition, like if you're going to sell your company, private equity buyers, all buyers are looking at gross margin. They care about it a lot, right? It's like, is it expanding and growing over time? So that's a really great point. Do you guys want to finish it on that? I like that.
Works for me.
Okay, that's a wrap. Thanks to the guys. That's a good, fun episode. You know, I always like talking about what's going on at a high level in the space. It helps me run the business, or at least runs my companies. I hope as you listen to this that you get as much value out of this as I do recording it. I'm sure that we all do. I can speak to the guys. So that's a wrap.